God hates sin. Do you? So by the end of this, my toes are like totally stomped on. How much do you hate sin? I'm going to ask you that question. I'm going to ask it again. In John 17, Jesus prays a prayer. And the world's always talking about Jesus' prayer he taught to the disciples, but it was more about structure of praying than the actual prayer. And people recite that prayer all the time, and it's like, well, that was really more about what you should pray about. The beautiful prayer, I think, is in John 17, because he prays for us. And then he prays for us to be one with the Father as he and the Father are one. And that is hard for my mind to get around. But one thing for sure is if I'm going to be in that state of mind, I have to hate sin as much as God does. So we're going to start out there. And I want to start in one place right in the very beginning, in the Garden of Eden. That's probably pretty small. So let's go to Genesis chapter 3. We know the story. You ever wonder why the snake was there in the garden? Right? I think we got maybe a misunderstanding too of that snake, because God cursed it to crawl on the ground. And they always show it as a snake crawling in the tree. And it's like, maybe it wasn't, crawling before that, because why would it be a curse otherwise, right? That's just for a different lesson though. So let's get into Genesis chapter 3, starting verse 1. It says, "Now the serpent was more subtle." And that word subtle is cunning. So very cunning. So our enemy is extremely cunning. Think about that. Very wise. Remember the parable says, "I wish that we were wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves." And there's a reference there to our enemy and how he works in ways that preys on our fleshly bodies, our fleshly lusts, our fleshly approach to the world, right? And it says, "Then any beast of the field which the Lord God had made, and said unto the woman," and then this serpent too. Let's just look at what that is. It comes from the root word nakash, and it means to hiss, which doesn't help us a whole lot. But if you go on down, there's a root word there that it's from, and it literally means cast a spell. So this hissing is not just like a snake hissing, but he had ability, not necessarily like a magical spell, but he was able to be very influential, almost like casting a spell. You ever been around anybody that was so charismatic they got you involved in things, and you were doing them without even realizing it? You ever been around somebody like that? I picture that's what he was like, right? And so because of that, we went along there, and there was, how many laws were there in Eden that we know about? It was one, right, that we know about. And it said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. At that point, Adam and Eve had a knowledge of what? Good. Did they not? They were in a perfect state at that point. And notice that the garden was there. God created them to tend to it. He told them to subdue and get dominion over the world. So there was work there to do, but I'm satisfied that their weeds didn't choke out your corn. You didn't have to, if Jeff was there, he didn't have to go spray his fields, right? Was unnecessary. You put the corn on the ground and it probably just sprouted up and wasn't crazy, right? So it was a very beautiful place. So the knowledge they didn't have was of evil. That's what the enemy had to offer. And so, lo and behold, that's what happened, right? And we get the curses from that. Now, what came with the curse? Death. We all face death, right? Daryl had his hip operated on. He's in better shape now. But in that world that we're going to, there will be no such things as hip operations, right? You won't have that kind of thing. Here we decay. We slowly, over time, we get old and we die and we perish. But what lives inside of us, to think of this body as a husk, the seed, the light that's inside that spiritual life is what's going to go and survive this body, right? But that death is a direct result of the sin that happened in Eden. Think about how far that's gone. And the world looks at God, it's like, and we're going to talk about that some of this morning. When Joshua went into Jericho and he killed women and children and babies and animals and everything, and God instructed him to do that. But look at the sin that's killed babies and stuff throughout the whole time we've been on the planet. Sin is responsible for that. Not a single baby would die today if we hadn't fell from Eden. Think about that. The price of sin is so powerful that literally, he said, creation groans under the burden of it. We are paying that kind of price for sin. And yet the world we live in today, as they're like, oh no, you have to embrace it. You're a Christian, you can't judge anyone. It doesn't say that, actually, right? People get caught up in that. The types of judgment God tells us not to do, we're prohibited from doing. I can't look at Bob and say, you're directly going to go to heaven and you're going to go to hell. I can't tell him that. That's not my call. You're going to go to heaven. But I'm just saying. But you know what I'm saying? That is not a call we can make. That's beyond us, right? But if you saw me robbing a bank, it's not necessary to know what's in my heart. You now know I've done something wrong. You have the right to judge me for that, do you not? There's a difference. Now, if you heard that I robbed the bank and you didn't know, then you wouldn't have the right to do that. Does that make sense? You'd have to find out directly. But if we do catch each other in real legitimate sin, we have a right to call it out and should call it out. We're going to find that out today. All right, so because of sin, we live in the world we live today. We have pain. We have suffering. We have ones that we lose, loved ones that we want near and dear to us. All because of sin. It's the price of sin. So when somebody points to the flood or to Jericho or anything else and they talk about how could God do that? It's like we did it to ourselves, but we fell in Eden. And we're living under that burden today. And people die because of sin. That's why. It's what's happening today. So if we flash forward just a bit, let's go into the flood. And I'm just picking some things here. So Genesis, let's jump over to Genesis chapter 6. And I'm going to jump around just a bit here. Starting at verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Is that a very good... if you meet someone... I have this to happen, right? I run into people and we interview people all the time, and it's like, I'll get phone calls. Do you know such and such? And I'll say, yeah, I do. And I'll either give them my assessment on their work capability, a good fit for the job or whatever. But if you know somebody fairly well, you usually give them high praise and recommendation and the whole thing. God knows us very well. And what did he say here? This is just enough. I could end right here if we just lived on this verse alone. We would realize how rotten we could be without Christ. I hate to say it, but it's true. He said, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Is that a very good assessment for us? It's not good, is it? So without Christ, this is what we can devolve to. And you think that's not possible. They've done experiments over the years, not so many decades ago. They took average college students, put them in a situation where some of them were going to be inmates. And so they had this all in the basement of the university, and then some of them were going to be the guards. Some of you are shaking your head. You know about this experiment. About 4 days in, they had to end it. The guards had become so cruel to the inmates that they had to end the experiment. And these were students. It went that way. We look back to World War II, and we had Nazi Germany exterminating people, burning them. The Soviets did the same thing. China starved about 70 million of their own people. And they all feel just about doing that. That is just evil, right? But at the end of the day, that's what man ends up with without Christ. What's our country trying to do? Wipe all vestiges of Christ away. You can talk about any religion, any secular worldview, but do not talk about Jesus. It's offensive. It's a microaggression. Have you heard of that term? But yet, what did God tell us? So is it serious? Yeah, it's serious. right? So, let's go on forward here. Sodom and Gomorrah. Now this is interesting to me. Genesis chapter 18:20 says, "And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous." Sodom and Gomorrah. I want to wrap up on the flood part. I probably should have said this first, but God destroyed everything on living thing on the earth at the time, except for Noah and his family. So he wiped everything out to start over. And one of the main things to think about this, there comes a point in time when God realizes he's not going to be able to, those people have gone too far, right? Like, they're not going to listen to him anymore. There aren't any other people that he's going to be able to pull back to himself. Because he gives us free choice. Now, he could force us, but he's not chosen to do this, which, by the way, is real love, right? To be able to turn us free and allow us to make choices, knowing full well that we're not going to choose the right thing. Because we have an enemy that's constantly at work trying to get us to do something different. And here we were at Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, how bad was Sodom and Gomorrah? How many in here knew that Lot had son-in-laws? Yeah, he did. Now, it's not commonly taught, but because they always talk about his daughter. So we have this situation where in Genesis 18:22 through 32, Abraham is pleading with God not to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, the reason he didn't want that because Lot and his family lived there, and I assume there was some probably other relatives. We don't know. So he pleads with God, and he says, so listen, and I'm paraphrasing, God, you're a just God, you're a loving God. If there's 50 righteous people there, will you not do this, right? Now, we don't know the total population, but this seemed like a small number. And God said, I wouldn't do it. And then he goes back to him. What if there's 40? And he just kept going down until he got to 10, right? And God said, even for 10 righteous people, I wouldn't do it. So at least we know there weren't even 10 righteous people there, right? And later in 1 Peter, we find out that Lot was righteous. But let me tell you how far sin had permeated his mind. So the two angels that went there to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah showed up. And the men, all of them, young and old, the Bible says it's very clear, all of them came to Lot's house because they were homosexuals. They wanted those two angels. Lot put him in his house, offered up his two daughters, which they said they hadn't even known a man at that time. And the reason he had son-in-laws, they were pledged to be married to these two men. So they had not been married yet. But he had offered them up, which to our modern senses is like, what? You would give up your daughters? Now, part of the reason they did that was when you took somebody in, a traveler, you were responsible for them. Way more than we understand that today. And so he felt responsible for them. And he probably, I don't know, it doesn't say, but I'm going to guess he probably knew that these were messengers from God. So anyway, he went out to talk to these men, to reason with them, and they were trying to tear him apart to get in through the door, and the angels struck him blind, so they couldn't find the door. So he went back in, and they ultimately left. So it was him, his wife, and his two daughters. His son-in-laws didn't go with them. They stayed. His wife turned back and turned to a pillar of salt. His two daughters got Lot drunk and incest, right? So we got an idea of how sin affected that entire family from Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot didn't even want to leave, and he was living in the middle of it. And why didn't he want to leave? Because he got used to it. The enemy knows we will get used to sin if it just constantly is in front of us. Years ago, the kinds of stuff that's being put on TV would not have been acceptable. Just wouldn't have been. And now, it is. Totally acceptable. How many of us have gotten used to that sin? Now, to me, that scares me because have I been numb to this? To the point that I'm not making correct judgments? Could I be one with God? I know I can't do it without Christ, but I'm just saying, am I thinking the way he does? Do I see the sin that he sees? Do I find it repulsive? Do I try to pull myself back from it? And the world is saying, as a Christian, you're supposed to sit down and shut up. I'm going to get into 1 Corinthians chapter 5 here in a minute. And it says everything but that, right? We're supposed to be bold. We make sure that we're all going to get there, right? Our responsibility is to our brothers and sisters. Sin is a big deal. And every time sin gets this way, God destroys it. He does. It's just over and over and over again. We see it happening. He destroys it. He destroys it. He hates it. Right? All right, so I'm going to jump forward again to Jericho. All right, so this is a story we learned when we were kids, right? So, interesting story. This is after the Israelites had been wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. And what happened there? Remember the whole story where Moses goes up on the mountain to get the Ten Commandments, and he comes back down, and there's thousands of them had decided. And Aaron even fashioned the calf. His own brother fashioned the calf. And they were all worshiping the calf, because they had been tainted and polluted from Egyptians' gods and sin. To the point where when Moses was gone for 40 days, they just went back to their old habits. And God struck a bunch of them down there, and he made them wander around for 40 years. For a long time, because you remember that when they spied out the land they were supposed to go to, two of them, Joshua and Caleb, had the courage to go do it because they knew God was going to be fighting the battle. Good song, by the way. They knew that. They weren't judging themselves as the ones that were going to do it. God was going to do it. 10 of them didn't. So God made them wander around the wilderness till that whole generation died off. Sin again, right? And by the way, that's a lack of courage. I'll translate that into a coward. We were talking about this morning as a family. The first people tossed in the lake of fire in Revelation is cowards. Those who don't have courage. Because it's a representation of not having faith, right? Because you're not trusting God. So what was going on here? So they go into there, and Jericho's promised to them. And they had the story where Rahab, she's a prostitute, a harlot, but she realizes that these people are going to come in, and she hides them out, and they let the spies there. And so she lowers them down with a rope and lets them out, and they escape. And so they come back, and God has an interesting way to take them over, right? Did they have cannons to bring the wall down? No, he said, march around. Do this 7 times and blow your horns and the wall will fall. And it did. Who made it fall? God. If you're up against a wall of sin, who can bring that wall down? God. We're not going to be able to do it by ourselves. We're just not. Because we, as hard as we try, we're going to fall prey to our own lusts and body and mind without his control. Does this make sense? So he brought down that wall. And then he gave him a command, which is very hard for, and believe me, when I was growing up, I found this very difficult. He told him to kill everything. And I was thinking, babies too? What have they done wrong? But see, sin is so disgusting to God, he doesn't want anything. You think about this as a human life. If you become a Christian, he wants you to kill off even the little baby things that could grow into sin. He wants you to kill it off. You think about the Israelites wandering around through Egypt. If that's a human life, you're wandering around to get rid of the things that doesn't serve God, the old you. So the new you can have courage and faith and step out in boldness under the banner of Christ. Is this making sense? Sin is an evil thing. These events we've seen that God's done and stepped in the past, it's happening right here in front of us. Look how many wars is going on. We got this whole thing brewing in Europe. Is that from God? This strife we have in this country, is that from God? This is evil that the enemy is throwing at us. And he wants us to be quiet, so he is constantly telling Christians to be quiet. Don't speak about this LGBTQ plus whatever, right? It's gotten this long now. I kid you not. I was at work and they gave me some training, and all the exclusions for things was so long. It's like, well, you might as well just put the things in there that aren't excluded. It's easier a list to remember. It's like, it just keeps growing, right? The world has gotten so nuts that if you say anything about homosexuals or transvestites, or I'm sorry, I'm just being honest here, but that's not what the Bible says. This is reprehensible. He considers an abomination. It's a sin, and it's going to kill those people spiritually. We don't do them any service by saying, oh, nice, keep doing what you're doing. That's not helping them. They might feel better here, but they won't feel better there. Right? So what happened? So they go in, they destroy the city, they sack the city, they do everything they're supposed to, except one guy decides to take some gold bars and some things home with them. So the very next battle that they get into, the Israelites lose. And God said, it's because you have one in your number that didn't do what I said to do. So they finally inquired and found out who it was. And when the judgment on that person was not only him, but his wife, his children, everything he owned was to be destroyed, burned up, to remove from the midst. That sounds tough, doesn't it? It's hard for us who does, it's difficult to see how God could do that. But you start to see he has such a hatred for sin. Sin causes so much damage. If he would have allowed that nest egg would have grown. Every time the Israelites bumped in, like Babylon, this whole war between Babylon and Jerusalem, that's what's happening. Babylon was the place where they got all this pagan worship, and they brought it in. Today, the Jews, they have like 32 volumes in their I forget what it's called. What was that? Torah. Well, yeah, the Torah, but they got this bigger set of, and I forget what it's called. I apologize. I'll look it up afterwards. But if you go into it, I've not read the thing. I've just read little snippets out of it. But they have pulled much of the belief system they have from Babylon. Directly traceable to that. See, God knows us. He knows who will go off after. He calls them strange gods. We'll just do it. It's just what we do without Christ. And I know this is hard to hear, but it's true. And so that's what he did. He destroyed that sin again from within the camp of Israel. And we've watched this battle over the years, back and forth, back and forth. And he would find somebody faithful, and they would restore Jerusalem. Nehemiah was one of those. And then they would fall away again. Do you find your life like that? Where you struggle with sin sometimes, and it pulls you away? Here, you could kind of make this reference that if you go off and carry home some of that little sin, you won't win the next battle. You need to take that sin back out and burn it. Do you see the metaphor? If you're hanging on to that sin, it's going to destroy your ability to walk with Jesus. And I'm speaking to myself on this too. I've been studying this for about 4 weeks, so it's very difficult to look at this and go, oh my gosh, I don't know that I've hated it enough as I should have. Because God certainly does. I'm going to get to the core of the message today, which is 1 Corinthians chapter 5. And this is, I'll read most of this. Chapter 5 is pretty good. Now, there's some stuff in chapter 4 we could read to put this, but I want to just go ahead and jump into it. It says, this is Paul writing to him. He said, it is reported commonly there is fornication among you, and such fornication is not so much as named among the Gentiles. That one should have his father's wife. So Paul's calling it out. He's saying, hey, look, you're the church. You're a congregation. And your sin is even more reprehensible than the Gentiles are, the heathen, the ungodly. Even they have higher standards. You've got this case of a son having his father's wife. I know this is brutal to talk about, but that's just where it is. He says, you are puffed up and not rather more. Now, what he means by that is being puffed up is they're proud. How many churches today or Christians today are like, oh, I'm not going to judge that person. I'm just welcome them in. There's a difference between loving them truly, their spiritual output, their outcome, versus that hard lesson you have to have, right? As a Christian, to a fellow brother or sister. That's tough. It's really tough. But at the same time, if you don't do that, they will fall, possibly forever, right? That's what Paul recommends as we go forward here. It says, for verily I'm absent in body, but present in spirit, have judged already as though I were present concerning him that hath done this deed. So, is it rightful for Christians to judge fellow Christians if the act is known? It's not like you're presupposing, you have doubts or whatever. It's very explicit. It's very out in the open. In this case, the church was proud about it. Is it rightful to do that? You betcha, right? You betcha. Why would we do that? Well, we're going to learn about that a little bit later, why you would do it. It says, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, when we are gathered together in my spirit with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, to deliver such a one into Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that the spirit may be saved in the day of Lord Jesus. Now you have your answer. Deliver the fleshly body to Satan. Now, what does he mean by that? What does the enemy want to do? We learned that in Job when he said, hey, can I have access to Job? God gave him some access. What did he do to him? He did everything he could do. God put limits on him every time, but he would take it all the way to the limit. Killed his family, killed everything he had, put boils and sores all over him, made him sick. How much does the enemy want you? Remember, you're made in the image of God. He hates God. He hates you. If he can get his hands on you, what do you think he'd do? Yeah, we know. We got witness to that, right? So he says the reason you do it is you turn him over to that and let Satan destroy him physically such that he can turn spiritually back to the one who saved him. Do you see the outcome? Sometimes we get soft-hearted and we don't want to see that kind of thing happen. But if we have the long view, the fact that we're going to be together forever, we want that person to be there with us. It's better for them to struggle here and make it there than not. Does that make sense? It's hard, but it makes sense, right? We don't want to lose anybody. And sometimes losing them causes we have to go through some physical pain to do that. Have you ever encountered physical pain in your life from sin that you did? You don't have to raise your hand or anything. I'm going to guess a lot of us did, right? It says, anyway, it goes on here. It says, your glorying is not good. I don't know about you, but I keep up with the latest movements with a lot of the things that are going on in the world, the Christian world, and I use that in quotes. But there are churches who are proud to embrace these different kinds of gender roles and stuff that people are pushing today, and they're just pushing it on people. And they think they're being helpful. They're being loving. And in fact, that's what they'll tell you. You're not loving this person because you're not accepting them as who they are. And I would argue just the opposite. I see what they are inside. They're made in the image of God. They're a Christian. Their spiritual life matters a lot more than their physical life. Could these people be confused? Absolutely. We shouldn't give them license to go off the reservations and get destroyed permanently because they're chasing this, and support them in that as Christians, right? But yet I feel like the church is being squelched. Everybody's saying don't talk about it, don't challenge people, don't push that, right? And we have a duty to do that because we don't want to lose anybody spiritually. And sometimes you have to have the hard lesson here in the physical so you make it in the spiritual. And God may be using you just for that message. What's that? For such a time as this? What if you're the one? What if God's using you to get to that person? Now, you don't have to be cruel about it. I'm not saying that. But sometimes it's sitting down and saying, hey, look, this isn't acceptable in the body of Christ. Now, if you're a worldly person, that's different. He's going to talk about that in a second. But as a Christian, there are some things that are simply not acceptable, and we have to sit down and hold each other accountable. I would certainly want you to do that with me, right? And I would hope you would want the same from me to you. Because I want you all, and I want to be there with you forever in Christ's presence. To me, this world means nothing if we don't have that. It literally means nothing. So he says, your glorying is not good. Know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump? So there's another thing. He's saying allowing that in will start to permeate through other people. I used to pick apples a lot when I was a kid. And one thing you never did was put rotten apples in with good ones. What happens to them? It does. It don't take long either. Wherever that rotten spot, it spreads to the ones around it. And then all of a sudden they spread to the ones around it. At work, I had a team that I inherited. And they had really bad habits, and we were trying to put some things in place. Do you know I had to move those people? I had to break the team up and move them into completely different spots and start a new team because they would not break their old habits together. Isn't that amazing? It's once we start down a path, it can infect us. And so if we allow that kind of behavior in, it can spread to our detriment, right? So therefore, let us keep the feast not with old leaven, neither the leaven of the malice and wickedness, but with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. And he's just kind of making an analogy to communion. And I wrote unto you in an epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, then must needs go out of the world. So he's just basically saying there, all these people that I'm telling you not to associate with, it's not the worldly people. They haven't stepped up to be brothers and sisters in Christ. He's saying not to associate with someone who calls himself a Christian who's doing this. And the reason for doing it is that tough love to get them back in the fold. Now, that kind of thing doesn't work if we don't love each other, because it's like, well, I'm not missing on anything. I'll just go to some other congregation that accepts me. That's what happens today. But if you're in a group of people who are really bonded, Bob had a good lesson on that. You really love each other. You don't want to miss out on that. That kind of putting a wall up, the Amish call it shunning, but putting a wall up and saying, look, and he's going to talk about this, don't even eat with such a one. You don't go to dinner with them. The reason you do that is not because you're better than them. It's so that they feel the pain in their heart and want to change and come back to the fold. That's the whole reason for it. Right? This isn't about one person being better than another. It's saying, look, you have a very public sin. It's nothing to be proud about. Fix it. We're here. We'll be here with you when you fix it. We'll help you fix it. We'll pray with you, right? But it's not acceptable for you to continue that way. Is this making sense? This is tough. I know it's tough. Now he said, but now I've written, I'm going down here, for what have I to do to judge them also that are without? So he's saying, I'm not going to judge anybody outside of the church. Do not you judge them that are within. So he's saying you should judge those within the church. Now, I'm going to be very careful here. I'm not talking about prejudging, saying, hey, I saw Jeff out picking up beer cans on the thing and he was wobbling, so he was drunk, right? That's prejudging. I don't know the circumstances. He might have been lightheaded because he didn't eat, or maybe he was dodging a rattlesnake. I didn't see it. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of reasons for that kind of thing. But if you get that in your head and go around passing it around, that's what you call prejudging. You don't know what's going on. Now, if Jeff came up to me, I know I do this, so say, hey, look, I robbed a bank. I admit to doing it. Do you find anything wrong with that? I know I'm just joking here, but Well, yeah, then you could say, hey, that's not good. You probably need to give the money back and confess to the whole thing, right? Do you see the difference? What he's talking about? I know it's a silly example, but but them that are without God judges, therefore them without God, without talking about those outside of the church, God judges. Therefore put away from among yourself that wicked person. So that's what he's saying that we must do. As a church, we are to put them outside. Now, that's not for the purposes to say we're better than you, because we're only as good as Jesus, right? We're not any better than anybody else that way. But if a person doesn't recognize that they're living in sin, then they got to be in a place where you turn them over and let them get to the point where God works on them to get them back in the fold. The whole idea is to save their spirit, not to destroy them. Is this making sense? We want to get everybody home. Think about this as a rescue operation, right? And there's going to be times when I'm weak and you're strong and vice versa. That's why the body works, because each of us have different talents. All right, so I'm going to close out here. So do you hate sin as much as God? Are you willing to look at your life and go, man, what have I accepted from my culture, from the TV set, from the newspaper, from my neighbor, that isn't true, that violates God's law, that may make me take a different stance on sin? Right? I'm going to read one more thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. Know ye not that unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. And he's calling them out. He's saying, you guys were some of this, right? He says, but you are sanctified, but ye are justified in the name of Lord Jesus by the Spirit of our God. So he had some of them right there that were suffering from this, but they were sanctified through Christ. We in here who are Christians have been sanctified through Christ. Somebody mentioned earlier about being white as snow. The way to think about that is not because you are perfect, but God looks through you through Jesus. So if you're a Christian, he sees you through Christ. You're sinless when he looks at you that way. If you are not a Christian, he looks at you how you are. And what did we learn very early part of this lesson? That all man thinks about is evil continually. I mean, look at our country. Sad to say, most of the politicians up there, most of the people that lead corporations, most of the people in power, I hate to say it, but it's true, they are thinking about the dollar. They're thinking how to get one over on somebody else. They're coming up with schemes all the time. That's what they think about. They don't think about us. They don't think about God. They don't think about we're all made. You know, it's a simple solution to abortion. When you realize that every human life has been made in the image of God, that solves a lot of problems, doesn't it? It solves a race problem. It solves an abortion problem. It breaks all barriers, doesn't it? Every human being made in the image of God. We don't have the right to kill them, do we? And it's not up to us to save the world in that sense. Like we're going to go out and we're going to do those sorts of things the best we can. But remember, we can plant and water and seed and talk and live our lives as best we can. But God's going to be the one that convicts these people, and we should do that. We should live a life that's peculiar to them, and our hatred for sin would show up as peculiar. Trust me, if you hate things that the world seems to love, they're like, what? You don't think that's a good thing? It's like, no, I don't. So all of a sudden, you're an oddball. And believe it or not, there are a certain amount of people that find that interesting. And they may not be the people you think. They'll be the ones that fight you first. They'll argue with you, and that's like wife and I was talking about somebody, it's our neighbor, he's a very passionate person, likes to argue. And he doesn't like to talk about Jesus. And I actually take that as a good sign. A lot of people wouldn't, but I do, because it's getting to him. That's why he doesn't want to hear it, right? It's the dispassionate person that I struggle with, because I don't know how you reach them. But somebody that even wants to argue with you, there's promise there. That means inside of their soul, God's working on them. And you might be the vehicle to do that. Your hatred of sin will make you peculiar, and it will make people ask questions. Now, you don't have to do it mean. You're very loving. You don't have to yell at people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying hate sin as much as God does. You don't have to hate the person, but you do need to hate the sin. Does this make sense? Through Christ, we can conquer that, right? Without him, we're going to be vile. That's just my opinion. I think we'll start to get narcissistic. We'll think only of ourselves. That's where we'll end up. At least I'll speak for myself. Without Christ, I'd probably be a terrible person, just to be honest. If you're not in Christ today, there's no time like now. We're not promised tomorrow. Right? You went under the knife this week, right? There are people I know that went in for a routine surgery and didn't come out. We're thankful you're here. But what if that happened? What if you got sick and passed away before you accepted Christ? Do you want to be viewed directly by God for who you are? Or would you rather have Jesus in between? I know my answer. What's yours? As we sing.